So let's talk about the next thing. We have different size sanders with different size strokes. They're all over the map. So you got, a 3/16 inch stroke or a 5 millimeter stroke. You got 3/32 stroke, which I think is like a 3 millimeter stroke. And then you got everything in between. Festool is the one that to me is the most confusing because they have like a stroke in between 1.5, 2.0. So, I mean, what is the deal with that? What are we looking for? Because like what I've been told and what I've experienced is kind of different at times. A lot of guys will say the smaller the stroke, the less swirl marks you see. So what's the truth in all this, and what are we looking for when we're choosing sanders and the strokes and all that kind of stuff?
Okay, so when it comes to the actual orbit that you're referring to, so this is a 3/16 orbit. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
All right, versus a 3/32 orbit. Okay, you see that's almost half the amount of movement.
Sure.
So where I use this is never use it on anything other than sealer sanding or high gloss sanding. So it's less aggressive. It's not moving as much.
Right.
Does it translate into less swirl marks? That's a good question, and I don't know if it really makes that big of a difference from the swirl mark standpoint, other than the fact that it doesn't sand as aggressively. So maybe your paper is not making as deep of a scratch because of that, which makes you find when you buff, hey, it's a little easier to buff high gloss to buff out with 3/32 orbit versus 3/16 orbit.
Right.
So 3/32, typically your really high grit sanding applications. 3/16 is your most popular. That's your typical woodworking orbit pattern that you want. It's fast, it's aggressive, but it's not too fast and too aggressive. Next from there, you go to some of these crazy huge orbits like 3/8 and whatnot, or like you said, 5 millimeter. You're getting real big orbit patterns. Now you're becoming very, very aggressive with the sander, and that's really for calibrating or trying to calibrate with an orbital and trying to be really aggressive. I find that stuff comes more into play with the solid surfacing guys making countertops, and when they've got a seam and they got to be really aggressive on the seam, they'll go to a larger orbit pattern to knock the seam down, but then they'll finish off with a 3/16. That's usually their go-to afterwards. So my opinions with the orbitals, go 3/16 and forget about everything else. 99% of the time, that's what you really need.
All right, so it's very interesting that you say 3/16 because that's what I've always done. But a lot of people do the smaller orbit. Most of the guys I know use the smaller orbit. Now, the problem that I've had with the smaller orbits is I get little bitty J hooks in stain work. So I've always done the bigger one, and I never have swirl marks or anything like that. But I have had issues with what you're saying, trying to use a 3/16 to polish out high gloss. It leaves those deeper scratches in there. And so you want to go to that. But I think the little 3x4 sanders that have come into popularity over the last 5 or 6 years. So what is our application for those? Are they really meant as a finish sander, or can you use them? I know a lot of guys really like them in the refinishing industry for, sanding smaller profiles and things like 1.5-inch face frames and things like that. But what's their real design?
Okay, so your 3x4 sander, it's got a 1/8 orbit to it. It's a little harder to do, but it's got a 1/8 orbit pattern to it, and it's just orbiting. It's not spinning while orbiting. So that's a random orbital. That's just orbital. From an aggression standpoint, this guy is less aggressive than your random orbital. So if you were to pencil mark this door and take 180 grit on both tools, you'll take it out quicker with a random orbital than you will with a jitterbug.
Yeah,
but the jitterbug can be used on all your flat surfaces. It can be used on everywhere that you were normally using a regular random orbital sander. A little bit slower, a little more chance to create a swirl mark because it doesn't have the motion of the spinning action to remove swirl marks, especially when you get into corners and stop and you dig in as you stop your tool. So one thing I recommend from a swirl mark standpoint, whether you're using a random orbital or an orbital, is you place the tool on the surface, start your sander, and stop off. Start on, stop off. I see guys do this a lot of times. They got their sander running and they come into the part. When that thing's spinning at 12,000 RPM, it's like a grinder. And if you do that, you're going to gouge or put a dip into the part. And when you're going to stop it, if you stop it on the surface as it's spinning real fast and then it digs in at the end, so you're going to create swirl marks if you do that. So you want to start on, stop off as a rule of thumb. Back to the 3x4. It can obviously get into areas that a round disc can't. A round disc cannot get into a corner. There's nothing you can do about it. A 3x4 can. And there's different ways to make a 3x4 even more effective for getting into corners.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and do that while we're on the 3x4. Let's show us some stuff that you found over the years that works really well. Now, one thing I want to bring up that you have that I haven't seen, and I'm just trying it, especially on MDF doors, is the rubber pad that you have that you guys especially make. I want you to talk about that as you go through. But go ahead and give us a rundown here.
Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned the rubber pad because that's exactly what I was going to talk about to start with. So if you look at your typical 3x4 sander, you know, the corners of the pad are a little bit rounded.
Yep.
And the density of that rubber is quite hard. This is a molded urethane pad, and it's pretty hard. So what I'm going to do just quickly here, I'm going to take this part. I'm going to pencil mark into the corner for you. So conventional 320 paper directly onto the machine. And you can see what's going on here, right? I've got no support on that corner. Can you see that in the video? Yeah?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So now I'm going to try and go into this corner and sand this. Now you hear that bouncing and vibrating?
Yep.
Well, I can feel it because my sander is banging like crazy, which you can see there. Now let me try and bring that close to you. Now you're trying to look in there. You can still see pencil mark in there.
Yeah, it's hard to see it from here, but
hard to see it, but there's still a little bit of pencil mark in there. And with this, you know, that banging action, if you look at the paper there, you see how it's bunched up there already?
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing, when you go to do flat surfaces, it gets bunched up in corners. That then turns into problems when you're sanding flat surfaces because you've got a ball or a high spot there that can make marks. It can also, you know, make marks on the edge of the door and this profile here. So what we did is we created this rubber interface pad, and it's a fairly firm rubber, but it's still got some give to it, and it goes in between. And what this guy does is he takes all the shock out of it, and you've got your paper now. It fits this pad exactly perfectly all the way around, and now you've got a squared off corner to get into stuff like this. So I'm going to go ahead and pencil mark that again, and listen for the noise and look for the vibration. You know, that's so much smoother.
Right.
And I'm getting right into my corner. So I got rid of my pencil marks even better. Nice. But I didn't hammer the edge with the pad or the paper. I didn't bunch up my paper or put any creases or any marks in it. So now I can go ahead and do my whole center panel with it. And I like to take this guy. And that's about all I do when I prep the center panel on an MDF door. 320 grit, just what you saw me do. Basically 2 times around, a couple times back and forth in the middle. And this guy... And when you go to put your first coat of primer on there, because we use 320 grit and we polished it up, you're going to get much, much less of the primer swelling the MDF and soaking into the MDF. You're going to get more sitting on top. You're going to get more build, less swelling, less puffing, more leveling, easier to finish after that.
Yeah. Well, but the great thing about your all's 170 primer and even the 180 is it doesn't puff up the MDF near as bad as other stuff. So just throw that in there.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to care. I know you can kind of get away with whatever because of that. So hey, that's one of the things we try to do, make that coating so it's easier for people to work with, regardless of how meticulous they are with sanding.
Sure.
Back to this 3x4. I want to show you something else that we can do with this tool that you can't do with orbitals. So we'll take the actual pad itself. I took the regular 3x4 pad and we just cut it narrower to do a door where, I don't know if you can see that angle of that door. See the profile? It's got these are the old school doors of raised.
Yeah.
So you fit your paper, you cut your paper down to fit your pad. And we can actually put that wherever, right in the middle. Now I'm going to pencil mark this thing. And a lot of these doors, I've seen them a million times where they've got knife marks in them from whoever did the molding.
Yep.
And then you assemble a door and you're like, okay, I got to get all the knife marks out. And after assembling the door, there's mismatch here. There's where the two miters go together. One's higher, one's lower. You got to level it out somehow. So I'm going to actually use the edge here like a fence. I'm going to use the edge here like a fence. But I'm going to put a bit of pressure. I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to do it without turning the sander on for a sec. But can you see that pad curving?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go up one side, down the other side, right up the middle. And you see all those pencil marks are gone.
Nice.
I flexed the whole thing real fast and did a nice job. And then you can get right up into your corner. And level out with it. So that's another good use for that same pad, making it more versatile and giving you more applications for this tool. Now, with the same thing, I'm going to do another thing here. Here's something everybody loves sanding, right? Crown molding.
Yeah. Get out the hand sanders and the profiles.
Right. So you know how fun that could be. So I'm going to show you Eka Silk, 1/2 inch thick, fine. And their 1/2 inch thick is really soft and pliable versus their 10 millimeter pads, which are very firm. This is fine. This would be even better in a medium grit for this application, but I'm going to show you fine. That's what I got on the bench right now. I've again cut a smaller strip of that pad and put that on there. And now you see what it's doing in that profile. It's giving me a little more pressure, getting me down in there.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because that's one of the issues that I've had with using those foam pads is that they can form, but you never get down into the bottom. Like it just does the high spots.
Yeah, you can't get the pressure where you need it.
Yeah.
So you put that little interface pad, slice it up however you want, and put it on there, and it's going to give you that depth and that reach. Nice. I'll actually pencil mark this for you because that's the magic test, right? You get the marks out. Gone.
Nice. That's awesome.
I'm also going to take it over to this side of the profile. Now I just did all of this stuff here.
Cool.
So, you know, and sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you can even stack them. I just finished doing a whole bunch of fence finishing in my backyard, and it's privacy fence, so you've got the overlapping fence, and you've got depth issues. So this thing can't get in everywhere. I use the electric version of this, but there's spots in the fence where this is just too wide. So I put on 2 of these guys over top of each other like that, and I put my my paper on top of there, and I used it like that to reach into a deep profile and sand it.
Nice.
So you can do a lot of different things with that guy, just with the addition of this rubber pad alone.
So if you were doing like let's say in a kitchen refinish, because this might help some guys, and you have the 5-piece doors that have the raised panel in it. Is that a good application for that as well, so that you can get down in there to sand that?
Yeah, put that guy on there. You can put that guy on the edge here, and then stick I'd go with a medium version of this. But now that.
So, and just while you're doing that, so a medium is going to be like a 180 grit scratch?
Correct. So here's the application I think you're talking about, right? Something like that?
Exactly.
So.
Nice.
Cool.
Game changer.
Right, and with those rubber pads, you can also get them with a 4-hole pattern in them.
Yeah.
So there's paper with 4-hole patterns in it. All these sponge producers like this is Eka Silk Plus. That comes in 4-hole pattern in all their different products as well. Ecomont makes their Film Tech, which is this blue film paper. They make that in a variety of products in 4-hole pattern as well. So you can get your 4-hole pattern, you can get your sander with your 4-hole and your vacuum on it, and you can collect your dust.
Nice. But just for a second, talk about that. So now is that paper, is that a film back abrasive? Is that what we're...
So with Unita, they have their, this is film. Okay. It's called Film Tech, and it is film. Tech.
Okay.
They also have a product called Eka Blue, which I don't have on my bench here, but it's a typical traditional paperback product.
Yeah.
Both are very good products. Both work very well.
I have some of their just standard paper, and I'm assuming it's aluminum oxide, and they just tinted it blue.
Yes. That's Eka Blue.
Yep.
Aluminum
works
oxide.
good. Yeah, works
Film
good.
Tech is also aluminum oxide.
Okay.
So I've seen guys run these pads to the point where they're disintegrated, and they keep running them. You got to change those things once they get beat up, because once this thing's all distorted and curled down and whatnot, let me see if I have anything really beat up here.
I can go get my sander. It's beat up. I need to change mine.
You know what I'm talking about, right? Once the backup pad itself, see, this guy's a little bit beat up, a little burn in the middle, but the edges of it are still intact. It's still flat. Yeah. Once they start getting curled and stuff like that, once they get curled in, it's time to change them, because that's going to curl and put edge pressure on your paper. It's going to make swirl marks. It's going to make track lines as you move back and forth. It's going to cause all kinds of problems.
Gotcha. All right.